What's going on, guys? It's Mulligan. And after playing this deck since the end of Season 1, it's finally time. It's time to talk about Burn Queen. For those new, this is not a deck tech per se. This is more of me discussing where I'm currently at with Burn Queen. And I'll be covering a lot. I'll touch on the list I'm playing, but I won't be going card by card. I'll only touch on specific ones. And there will be a little rant about a certain card in the list, so fair warning. I'll also talk a bit about what I've learned playing the deck, cards I've previously played in the deck that are no longer in my list, and the possible future of the archetype going forward in this new meta. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed that the list I'm running is a little different from the typical lists you saw before Omens came out. The reason for me playing a list like this is because at the end of the Empty Throne metagame, there were basically two styles of Stone Scar aggro, let's say. The traditional Burn Queen, that many of us know, that doesn't always play units on curve in exchange for only playing high impact early game units and big burn spells. The deck can be extremely explosive, but because of the awkward curve of early game units, specifically the lack of turn 2 units, they can feel clunky at times and don't curve out very smoothly in the sense of a traditional aggro deck. The other style is what some know as Jito-less, although there are other names people have used like Rally Queen or just Stone Scar aggro. This style relies more on a unit curve, so it's more consistent than traditional Burn Queen in that sense, but because they run fewer big burn spells and they usually lack cards like Cabal Countess, they are less explosive. The list I have here is my attempt at trying to find a middle ground. I personally think that the way traditional Burn Queen is built is pretty bad, or let's say unhealthy. The deck is very clunky for an aggro deck, but because Stone Scar is just brutally efficient at what it does, people get away with winning games that looked unwinnable, myself included. And the clunkiness, it kind of gets swept under the rug. I often thought that eventually people aren't going to get away with building the deck the way it is, and there would be a metagame that would force Burn Queen players to build a more consistent deck at some point. Because when the deck flops, it flops pretty hard. But my thoughts on that might change due to a certain card that I'll touch on later. Anyway, I still liked having access to both Flame Blast and Obliterate, and even Cabal Countess to a lesser extent. However, and I didn't like the fact that if Jito-less doesn't win the game on the board, they can just be dead in the water since they lack the amount of reach that Burn Queen normally packs. So I came up with this list that tries to combine the best of both worlds. This is not optimized though, so it's by no means a final list. I just wanted to share where I'm at with the archetype right now in the Omens meta. Now, I just mentioned that Stone Scar aggro is brutally efficient. Now, I don't mean it from a this deck is broken standpoint. I'm just talking about pure ladder efficiency when I say that. If you queue up with the deck, even if you lose, you can just go, well, on to the next game. Because the games are so fast. In fact, I wanted to go to another list that I ran for a very, very long time. You recognize this list? Yeah, this is Lightning Ball's list. For those that have played Eternal since toward the end of closed beta. This is a list he posted last year in December. And it's kind of embarrassing to say, but I stuck with this list for a very long time. Even when people were making refinements to Burn Queen and new lists were coming out, I still played this list. I want to say well after Jex Bounty came out. But I don't think I ever had below a 60% win rate with this list, and it basically took me to master every season, at least during the first few months of open beta. And there are way better lists than this one now. Now you might say, and people say this in general, they think that the deck takes no skill to pilot. And me running an old list like this might it might be proof of that. At least up until recently when I came up with the new list that I have now. And I will say that aggro decks by nature are more forgiving than control decks, but if you don't play correctly, like any other deck, you will lose more games than you should. A lot of the thinking comes in the early game when playing aggro. Which units to play first, where to use your direct damage cards, and when. Playing to your outs if you can't win with your current hand, which usually means you have to do math. And contrary to popular belief, just like control, you do have to think multiple turns ahead more often than not. But it's been an excellent ladder deck, although I think it won't be quite as good at doing this as it has been, and I will touch on that a few more times during the video. Now, there are decks in this game that I think are truly degenerate, but Stone Scar aggro decks are not among those. So switching back to this list, because I do want to talk about a couple of cards. The first one is actually Flame Blast. And this is where the rant kind of comes in. So some people don't like this card at all. Maybe to the point where they want it nerfed to where it's unplayable. I am not in that camp. It does give aggro a fighting chance if the game goes late and all their units are gone. But more importantly, it's a tool that keeps control decks honest. More so control players. If we didn't have Flame Blast as it is, then control players get to play with their food, if you will, which I am personally not a fan of. The whole argument that people use that aggro's like playing solitaire, well, if control got to kill whatever they wanted, draw cards as much as they wanted, and end the game whenever they felt like, then that whole solitaire argument could be used on control decks as well. It's fine to control the game, but I just don't like the idea of just ending the game whenever you feel like it, and I think it's just better to win the game sooner rather than later. Now, granted, if you're playing aggro and you have no way of top decking enough reach to end the game, you should probably concede. And with the new decks that have cropped up thanks to Omens of the past, I personally think there are more than enough decks that keep Burn Queen in check, but I will talk more about those towards the end of the video. So the next card I'm going to talk about, which I'm sure everyone has seen by now, is On the Hunt. So I wanted to test this card because I thought it had potential, and I decided to play this along with Memory Dredger as my 4-drop to get the 4/4 Hound back, along with the other 1 and 2 drops in the deck. Now my thinking was that even though I can't attack with the 4/4 if I pull it from the void, it's still a strong threat my opponent has to deal with. But I've been disappointed so far. I've only played a few games with this card, but I already feel like running 3 is incorrect. I feel like if you're going to play this card, you run 4 copies or none at all. And I say that because I've had games where I don't have this in my opening hand and I end up needing to top deck Burn or Removal or another card to win or stay in the game, and I end up top decking this. And it has felt awful every time. But I'm still holding out some hope for the card, because it might fit better in traditional Burn Queen, since they're thin on 2-drops anyway. Often they go turn 1, Oni Ronin or Pyro Knight, turn 2, draw a card with Quarry, if they don't have Instigator in hand. In a way, this is really a 2-drop that you're able to set up on turn 1, so this list is really running 8 1-drops and 11 2-drops, not the other way around. The last card I want to talk about in this current list is Memory Dredger. I don't really have much to say on the card since I'm still testing it out. The big draw of it is that you can get back your On the Hunt token, an Instigator, or even a buff Pyro Knight late game. I'm still trying to weigh whether doing 2 less damage than Impending Doom is worth this effect though. This is definitely a flex slot, and if Dredger turns out to be awful, then I'll definitely be switching back to Impending Doom. So let's talk about the cards that I've used in the past that are no longer in this deck. First up is Grenadin Drone. I used to run 2 copies of these, and the longer they stayed in my deck, the less impressed I was with them. Their shining moment is when you are on the draw against another aggro deck and they turn 1 Oni Ronin. Then you play this on your turn 1. It's excellent at defending against aggro, but it's pretty underwhelming otherwise. And I always felt like they were just a throw-in during set 1 because we didn't have anything better to play. The next 2 cards I want to talk about are Ticking Grenadin and Shadowlands Guide. These have been used together in early iterations of Burn Queen. When I was putting my list together, I gave up a few burn cards and I wanted to find a unit that could make up for the lost face damage. And I always wanted to try this combo out, and I wasn't sure on what my other 3-drop was going to be either because I didn't like Cabal Countess at the time. I was also overall disappointed in Grenadin Drone, so I threw in 2 copies of Ticking Grenadin and 2 copies of Shadowlands Guide to run with 2 copies of Cabal Countess until I could figure out which 3-drop I liked better between the 2. Now, Shadowlands Guide has clearly been the better of the 2, and Ticking Grenadin, at least on its own, hasn't been as good as I thought it would be, but it's still serviceable. There have been corner cases where the 3 damage matters, or I play it when my opponent is single-digit health and it just locks up the game for me. Overall, though, it was also pretty underwhelming. Now, Shadowlands Guide, on the other hand, at least got back any of my other 1-drops. Ideally, buff Pyro Knights if the game has gone that late for some reason, and it's a reasonable threat on its own. And Guide was an absolute all-star after an opponent's harsh rule as well, just to refill the board quickly. Next card I want to talk about is Groundbreaker. This is shaping up to be the most overhyped card in Omens of the past. I replaced Impending Doom with this, and it wasn't good at all in my testing. I think what happened a lot of the time is that Stone Scar's units, while good in combat, largely don't have a lot of evasion. There aren't any flyers early game, and only Pyro Knight and Champion of Chaos have Overwhelm to activate the Spark. A Groundbreaker almost never came down with double damage, and I couldn't even consistently get him down on turn 4 either, due to that triple fire influence. Although, I could just as easily blame the power base that I'm running as well. I also sorely missed the flying from Impending Doom to defend against air units from my opponent. I think this could still possibly have a place main deck in Rakano or Skycrag, but as far as Stone Scar is concerned, I feel better leaving this in a sideboard for tournaments. And the final card I want to talk about is Impending Doom. Not really much to say, honestly. The card is still very good. I just wanted to test out Memory Dredger. But if Dredger ends up flopping, this is going right back in, as it's just a beat stick. And the drawback doesn't matter since you plan to end the game quickly or lose anyway. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed one thing, and you are asking this question. Where is Quarry? Admittedly, I've avoided the card up to this point. Some people in the past have told me you always run 4 copies of Quarry and Burn Queen, and I've never been a fan of that school of thought from the beginning for reasons I stated before. It just seems bad in an aggro deck to go turn 1 super aggressive unit, turn 2 draw a card, but again, Burn Queen is so explosive, they can get away with a bad turn 2. And Quarry does reduce your higher cost cards like your Impending Dooms and Obliterates, and even Soulfire Drakes for some lists, so I can understand why Quarry is played. I am thinking of fitting them into my list and moving away from curving out with units, since Rakano Outlaw has been good, but not amazing by any means. I'm basically really hoping On the Hunt pans out if I go that route. So lastly, I want to talk about the possible future of Burn Queen and where it could go from here in the Omens of the Past metagame. So in the past, people would get 60 to 70% win rates with Burn Queen, but now that Omens is out, I don't think people are going to get the crazy win rates they used to. People will say that it was the nerfs to Rapid Shot and Champion of Chaos that made the deck less powerful. Rapid Shot used to cost 1, and the Champion used to be a 5/5 when fully activated for those new. But the deck was still good, even after those nerfs, and had nearly the same win rates, I feel. Only Big Combre at one point could really go toe-to-toe with the deck at the time, in my opinion. Now, this is probably going to sound crazy to some people, but I think what actually marked the beginning of the end of the insane win rates was the revival of Chalice control decks. Now, some have had different experiences from me, but in my experience, the Burn Queen versus Chalice matchup is so tight that literally every point of damage counts if you're the Burn Queen player. It's not the worst matchup in Eternal, but Burn Queen at best is even against Chalice. I'd rather face Big Combre than Chalice if I'm playing Burn Queen, just to give an idea. Now, this is based on the fact that I'm running more units than normal. So it could be that the more unit-focused Jito-less style of Stone Scar, which my list leans more towards, isn't as good against Chalice as the traditional Burn Queen style. I would love to know more about the matchup, so to anyone that has more experience than me, please share your thoughts in the comments below. But Burn Queen may have a bigger problem than Chalice. Yes, the deck that gives Burn Queen the most fits, in my experience, is Xenon Life Force. It's hard to win when almost every card they play is gaining them health every turn. And I want to say really quick as well that I was completely wrong about Oasis Seeker. When I talked about the card in my set review, I basically said the card isn't that good and wouldn't stick around as a core card in Xenon Life Force decks because so many 1-drops trade up against it. And I have 8 1-drops that kill the card. The problem is, while Pyro Knight and Oni Ronin prevent Seeker from attacking, once Catra hits the board, then it doesn't matter, since Seeker buffs to a 4/3 immediately if you don't have Torch for Catra when she comes down. So, yeah, I fully concede that Seeker is a core card until something even better than it comes along for Xenon Life Force. I'm not fully ready to concede the matchup yet, but if Burn Queen is ever going to have a chance to beat Xenon Life Force, I think we need to think more critically about our game plan, specifically on what removal gets used where. But so far, it's been unwinnable for me, and maybe one of the worst matchups in the game, but time will tell. So to finish up, I think between Big Combre, Chalice, and Xenon Life Force, there are plenty of decks that keep Burn Queen in check. And yes, that is another reason we need stuff like Flame Blast. Even though people's opinions on Omens of the Past are that it's underpowered compared to the Empty Throne set, I think one thing it's going to do well is slow down the metagame. Now, I still don't know if it will be slow enough to where control decks can thrive, but it will be enough to where burn decks of the past like Stone Scar will not dominate. I think this is even more the case for the Jitolus style decks, since all three of the decks I mentioned are really good against smaller units. The main source of damage for that style of Stone Scar deck. At least with Burn Queen, you can play off the board somewhat, and your units are a little tougher to interact with. For this reason, I think despite all its clunkiness, traditional Burn Queen will end up being the best Stone Scar aggro deck in the near future, and cards like On the Hunt might help that. But that's all that I've got for you guys today. For those of you that made it to the end, I want to thank you so much for checking out this video, this discussion on Burn Queen and where it's at right now regarding the new metagame. I've done previous videos like this in the past, so feel free to check those videos out if you're curious. I've got plenty of other Eternal content as well. The other series that I'm mainly known for aside from this one is the Eternal Era series, where we actually focus on misplays with specific decks. It's a sort of what's not the play, if you will, for those of you that come from Magic. But there's other content as well. I've done tournament matches in the past. I've been having fun with drafts so far in the new Omens meta. So I've got a couple of draft videos as well. And right now I'm in the middle of reviewing the Omens of the Past set, card by card. So if you're curious to know my thoughts on those, feel free to check those videos out as well. And just look around the channel. I'm sure there'll be something that suits your fancy, because there's plenty of Eternal content, especially lately. But yeah, if you don't want to miss any of the stuff I mentioned coming up down the pipe, because I will have future videos regarding all the stuff I mentioned, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you click that bell icon next to the subscribe button, it does guarantee that you don't miss a video from me, since apparently even if you subscribe, that doesn't mean you always get a video in your sub box. Blame YouTube. But yeah, as long as you don't mind notifications, then that's what the bell icon will do for you. But thanks again for taking time out of your day to watch this. This is Mulligan signing out, and I will see you guys soon. Take care.